Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 433, Knows How to Forget. And we are now back to another one of these response poems. Sir Thomas Browne's Hydrotophia will be the response, potentially the response text. So the scholar Ruth Miller will say that this is another Sioux poem. Much like 434, the next poem in 438, and in some ways we're back to poem 203 with Emily's quest to remember. We will have here, I think, an interesting response to the question, is it possible to forget or to not remember? And to what degree can one play that game? And I think Sir Thomas Browne is what stands behind so much of this text. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've as well already read the preceding 432 poems. We just finished 432. Do people molder equally? And if that's the case, then you will be already aware of the ways in which at times Emily loves to respond to maybe another idea that she's read. Emily is a great reader, and part of her poetry often is a response to what it is that she was reading. Ruth Miller will make a general point that Emily does occasionally write a poem as a response to something which she's read. Ruth Miller, suggests this poem was written to show her disagreement with Sir Thomas Browne's assertion, again from Hydrotophia, that is to say the Greek for urn burial, chapter 5. Browne's assertion that we do have the ability to forget. Browne had written, quote, in Hydrotophia, quote, to be ignorant of evils to come and forgetful of evils past is a merciful provision in nature, whereby our sorrows are not kept raw by the edge of repetitions, end quote. Well, we're back to poem 203. Do you guys remember the way she said it here? He forgot, and I remembered. 'Twas an everyday affair. Long ago, as Christ and Peter warmed them at the temple fire. Thou wert with him, quoth the damsel. No, said Peter, 'twasn't me. Jesus merely looked at Peter. Could I do all else to thee? And we, of course, talked about that poem in some detail. Now let's enjoy Emily's response to Sir Thomas Browne, the great English philosopher. Knows how to forget, but could it teach it? Easiest of arts, they say, when one learn how. Dull hearts have died, and the acquisition, sacrifice for science is common, though now I went to school but was not wiser. Globe did not teach it, nor logarithm show. How to forget, say some philosopher. Ah, to be erudite enough to know. Is it in a book, so I could buy it? Is it like a planet telescopes would know? If it be invention, it must have a patent. Rabbi of the Wise Book, don't you know? Now, of course, Rabbi of the Wise Book is her referencing Christ, or Jesus, and to that degree, notice her challenge is, how is it possible to forget certain things? It is impossible to forget certain things. Notice, knows how to forget. But could it teach it? Now, the it here is probably the referencing to the essay by Browne. Easiest of arts, they say, when one learn how. Dull hearts have died in the acquisition. In other words, there are people that have tried to live out this idea of Browne's. It's easy to forget. And she says, I don't think so. Sacrifice for science is common, though, now. And then she'll say it. And this is one of the few times in her poetry when Emily speaks directly about her own education. And this is what she has to say. I went to school, but was not wiser. Now, I don't think that Emily is necessarily denigrating school. Ironically, her contemporary Walt Whitman, who she apparently never read, says in, you'll remember, Song of the Open Road, passage 6, wisdom is not finally tested in schools. In other words, what's her argument? There's things that we learn in school, but things like this, how to forget a broken heart or a lover that one no longer has, in this case for Miller it's Sue, I went to school but was not wiser. Globe did not teach it. Geography, the study of geography didn't help me. Nor logarithms show. In other words, my mathematics didn't teach me how to forget. Now what's interesting is that's in quotation marks, again, with the exclamation point after it. Notice all the exclamation points in this poem. And I think that Emily is back to her study of Shakespeare, and especially Romeo and Juliet. You'll remember that Romeo is speaking to his pal about his love, Rosaline. And he says, teach me how I should forget to think, right? Because you'll remember that his pal, Benvolio, is telling him, all you have to do is just forget about Rosaline, go to the party and have a good time. Of course, ironically, Romeo will do this very thing and we'll meet Juliet. We've given full lectures on RJ at learnstrong.net if you want to run that to ground. Say, some philosopher. In other words, I'm ready to listen to a philosopher about how to forget. To be erudite, we'll have seen erudite in 177. In 973, it's unerudite. That's the only three times she'll use the phrase, or the word. To be erudite enough to know, and then notice again the exclamation point. And then she'll begin with these rhetorical questions that culminates with a question for Christ. Is it in a book? Notice capitalized. So I could buy it? Is it like a planet? Telescopes would know. And again, we're back to this quest for epistemological certainty, right? If it be invention, it must have a patent. Rabbi of the Wise Book. Don't you know? Now, I think this is a challenging poem, and I think the poem is intentionally challenging to the theologians that would say, Jesus will help you to forget. She says, I'm not so sure about that. At 2a, I think the point here is it's impossible to forget sometimes certain things, like love and a broken heart. And I think the other argument is there's some things that just can't be taught in schools, that somehow transcend all the curriculum of a classroom. At 2b, well, this is another response poem again to the great English philosopher Thomas Browne. At 3a, well, obviously Browne's famous essay, and we mentioned Romeo and Juliet, but I would like to comment on Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, right? And you'll remember at the end, doth tease us, Cole Pastoral, doth tease us out of thought. And I think that's exactly what's happening in this poem. I think Keats stands behind a number of Emily's poems, and I think for sure Ode on a Grecian Urn comes to mind here. Of course, the translation out of the Greek specifically is in fact urn burial, right? Finally, at 3b, what is something that you struggle in your life to forget? And to what degree is Emily's poetry maybe helping you to deal with that inability to forget? Thank you.